Okay, so hi everybody, morning. I hope you're all well. So in completing my master's dissertation, I did a piece of research that looked at my own professional confidence and how I could challenge families respectfully. And I felt that this was impacted by my ethnicity, so I wanted to explore that a bit further. So if I just tell you, I'm going to go through a bit about my research, give you a short summary of my findings, and go through some of the useful tools that I used to actually unpick my dilemma. And then we'll have a brief look at implications for practice. So as Ross explained, I did an action research project, and action research is very much based on how you practice for yourself and improving that. So I noticed from very early on in my student journey that I would become quite anxious when raising concerns with parents. And I think that's something that a lot of student social workers suffer. But once I began to think about that practice dilemma, I further identified a pattern where I was more confident with working with families that I shared social graces with, particularly ethnicity and race. But my anxiety was heightened more when I was working with clients who presented ethnically as white. So this kind of resulted in a lack of clarity about concerns because I would fumble my way through things and delay sharing, my concerns. So in order to make sure that I was practicing in a way that was safe, but also anti-oppressive, I needed to make sure that I could unpick this. So I undertook this action research project to explore how I could raise my own confidence levels when raising concerns and be explicit about that. So when we look at the action research cycle, you observe a particular pattern, reflect on it, and how you could make changes, and then act and evaluate those changes and modify your practice accordingly, and go around in that cycle as often as is necessary to improve your practice. So as part of that, I pose myself 3 questions. Why is my professional authority stifled when I'm having difficult conversations? So what's that about? How that might be linked to social graces, specifically race, and that could include my own and also the families that I work with. And the third question was how I can reduce my anxiety to increase my professional confidence to make sure I was being explicit about any risks I was concerned about. So in order to fulfill this research, I had discussions with clients about their understanding of the concerns that I'd raised. So following any meetings I'd had with them, I would revisit that and make sure that their understanding matched the concerns that I was trying to raise. I also obviously looked at relevant research and literature, and very importantly, I had reflective discussions with my line management and also colleagues and peers who had agreed to be part of a reflexive group to enable these discussions. My starting position was congruent with the fundamental principles of critical race theory. So from there, we think that racism is inherent and everywhere at all times, and it makes racism ordinary and therefore difficult to address. So that was very much my starting position, and my study enabled me to present my claims to knowledge in respect of how we could increase safeguarding of children through the increased confidence of practitioners. So the summary of my findings is here then. So my claims to knowledge would be that your culture and your life world, your global experience, are going to impact how you think. Additionally, I determined that our race and experiences of racism can impair communication because of heightened anxiety. And also anxiety generally impairs our practice. And there were various pieces of research that evidence this and fed into my own understanding. So I came up with some remedies, having reflected. I came up with some modifications to my practice. So the first one, in terms of how we're impacted, is understanding the contexts that we're working within, because that reveals true meaning. So I needed some tools to unpick that. And in terms of how racism can impact anxiety, the remedy that I came up with for this was an increased knowledge of self, because that reduces uncertainty. And in terms of anxiety impairing practice, a remedy that I used for this was containment. And all of these remedies required particular tools. And some of the tools I will go through with you shortly. But to increase our understanding in practice, reflexivity is a tool that, I can't overstate the importance of. So reflexivity. I also used coordinated management of meaning, which is a systemic tool. Anti-racist practice, which we should all be working towards anyway, and also critical race theory, which I know can be quite controversial, but there were lots of bits in there that I found really useful. To increase my knowledge of self, I found that relationship-based practice was really good. And when working with families, being myself, being more relaxed about myself once I understood my own thinking, led to improved relationships with families. And in some cases that was through self-disclosure. So sharing a little bit of myself to get families to trust and be more comfortable about sharing a little bit of their selves worked really well for me. And in terms of containment, good quality supervision, reflexivity, and I also maintained a reflexive journal throughout my research, which enabled me to go back and look at things that I was thinking previously, perhaps during a meeting with a family, and really unpick why I was thinking the way I was thinking. So the findings of my research looked at, using systemic ideas to increase my confidence when engaging with families, and how our social graces can impact on those relationships. So coordinated management of meaning, relationship-based practice, concepts from critical race theory, they all supported me in considering how race and ethnicity, my own compared to a family, impacted how I was practicing. So yeah, the outcome was I was able to be more clear when raising concerns with parents. So how I did this, okay, the first thing I had to consider was the role of power within relationships, and this is a massive thing within social work. But power is definitely informed by our race and our experiences of racism, because that determines how powerful we might feel. So professional authority is absolutely linked to our personal and professional experiences, and we need to acknowledge that. And I hypothesized from my experiences that my stifled confidence was associated with my own perception of power and how I viewed myself as being mixed heritage, being older as a student. I consider myself a Black woman. I was newly qualified. So all of those things impacted how powerful I felt or not within my interactions. And I found two really useful concepts that assisted me in understanding my own self-perception, which then in turn enabled me to understand others better. So the first was I came across this link between racism and stress and anxiety, and it's referenced there who that's from at the bottom. But we can have perceptions of lack of control because of racism, which leads to stress. And that's as a result of racist experiences that make us feel that we lack control in our immediate environment. And if we are exposed to frequent experiences of racial discrimination, this can create feelings of not being valued or being viewed as less than. And that resonated with me personally. So we also have internalization, where people of colour, Black people like myself, might internalise beliefs of racial inferiority that are communicated by the majority. And this leads to feelings of negative self-focused thoughts that again increase our anxiety. And this can lead us to avoidance of emotions, or even taking a stance that racism doesn't hurt or it doesn't impact me. And the result of that can actually be poor mental health. So it's quite important that we're able to acknowledge these things and unpick them and be able to share our feelings around these things so that they're not building up within us. So that was the first one. And the second theory that I came across, I found really, really powerful. It really resonated with me. And it was Cross's theory of nigressence, which suggests that as Black people, we go through 5 stages of becoming Black in a white society. So the first stage that Cross talks about is associated with a negative Black identity as a result of the messages we absorb from the society that we live in, and that can lead to self-loathing or negative internalised feelings about being Black. But then he suggests that we move through to the encounter stage, where we might have an encounter or an experience that is unnerving or distressing for us. So a particular example might be, as was happened to me at the time, was the murder of George Floyd. That was a very significant encounter for me, and it starts you on a journey of questioning your feelings of negativity around Blackness, and sends you on a journey of self-examination. You then move into the immersion stage, where you immerse yourself in Black culture and everything. Yay, I'm rooting for everybody Black, and that immersion process gives you a sense of regaining control, and you can begin to identify more and seek out powerful Black role models, etc. You then move to the internalisation stage, which sees a decline in anti-white sentiment because we're becoming more secure in our Black identity, but we're still very angry about the racism that's in society and the impact that this is having. But we're able to mix socially and ideologically with all groups and have some flexibility and some understanding of the other. And finally, the commitment stage, where a level of inner security allows you to understand the importance of countering all forms of discrimination, and looking about the betterment of society as a whole. So there is much more to the theory, but that's the 5 basic tenets. But in considering that, I was able to see that over my life journey, I've traversed up and down along that 5-point scale, in an attempt to be finding myself and finding where I'm comfortable within my Blackness. And I think, it's a very personal journey to go through, but it's one that I believe most Black people will go through because of our experiences within society. So that very much fed into my research, because I needed to understand myself to be able to practice better. Okay. So some of the other useful tools that I used then, so it was a systemic project from the off, and Cronin and Pierce give us coordinated management of meaning. And I specifically used the hierarchy model that you can see here on the screen. And this model suggests that meanings are interpreted through a hierarchy of levels. So the lower ones, for example, on the diagram, the content, the actual words used to communicate, those meanings are informed by the higher levels of context that they're surrounded by. And miscommunication can occur where there's a mismatch between the levels of between people who are in communication. So for example, my highest context marker might be my self-perception, which would come under my life script. Whereas I might be working with a particular parent who, for them, the highest context marker might be the episode, because the significance of being visited by a social worker. And where there is mismatch there between the context is where we can have miscommunication. So using this tool, you can actually pick out bits of conversation that you may have found problematic and start thinking about, what was the contract that we had? What was the episode? What life scripts experiences might have informed that, and where is this person coming from, what is their archetype. So that allows us to reflect on interactions using that tool, and consider how then we can go forward and modify our communication, which I found really, really useful. Some of the other things I used, the good old genogram. These are used to explore connections between perhaps culture and personal identity, but they also enabled me to create a space to join the family system, and that made power sharing more available to both parties. So there was a coming together within the use of the genogram, if you like. I also used relationship-based practice, as I mentioned earlier. Use of self definitely requires knowledge of self, and our sense of self is dependent on how we identify with and feel valued and respected by others. And because I was able to think and reflect so deeply about the impact on this for myself, it enabled me to consider the position of families with great ease. And that obviously came across when I was working with my families, because I was able to unpick information with them. I was able to present my concerns to them, and they were able to take them on board because I wasn't coming across as judgmental in any way. I'd shared bits about myself through self disclosure, so we could look at commonalities between us and perhaps commonalities between our genograms. So I was able to consider, hidden social graces such as religion, and where these might have been shared or even different. It led to open discussion around those things that enabled families to feel that they could trust me enough to share issues and also accept advice around how to improve, their family functioning, which is obviously why I'm involved in their lives. So another tool that I used extensively was reflexivity. And this is about taking a particular position when we're co-creating meaning with people. So taking a particular position when we communicate. So you're not only reflexive, which is thinking about how others might be feeling about the interaction, but you're also self-reflexive, considering your own thoughts and feelings about your interaction. And then you can also be self-other reflexive, which thinks about how you respond to your experience, and why that might be. And when we can start thinking through all of those levels of our communication, it invariably means that we can modify our practice to make sure communication is easier and more explicit for the families. So reflexivity ends up being a very important tool to make sure that you're practicing in an anti-oppressive way. And then the final tool that I mentioned that was really good was supervision. Throughout all of the research that I looked at in terms of anxiety within social work, the importance of high quality reflective supervision was a common theme throughout. And I think sometimes it can be challenging, especially we're always busy as social workers. It can be quite challenging to make time to have supervision that can be really reflexive and supportive. So without that, you're not attending to the emotional and internal visceral responses to your experiences of practice. So supervision is something that's really important. And if you can't get it from your direct line manager, your practice supervisor, then you could link into somebody within your team, within your department, who you could have kind of a mentor-mentee relationship with, and have a reciprocal arrangement for peer supervision. So it doesn't matter where you get it from, as long as it's high quality and allows you to be reflexive. Okay, so this research then gave me some implications for practice, not just my own, but in the wider sense. So I was able to improve my practice by challenging myself both professionally and emotionally to reflect on why I would feel the way I would feel and how that was changing my interactions. And going through the process of action research, I'm having to explain through a document, through a dissertation, how this was working for me. But the process of doing that enabled me to explain to myself, which was really important. So it actually provided me with a reflective space for self-inquiry, and it served as catharsis and also containment. And because I got to know myself better, it also achieved the objective of reducing my anxiety and increasing my confidence when interacting with others, because I could see, I was better able to see their position in comparison to my position. So research suggests that the key relationship within social work is with ourselves. So we need to be thinking about that journey of self-discovery, because it impacts our decision making and also our capacity for self-care, which is so important in social work. Professional implications professionally, well, if I could improve my safeguarding through increased professional authority, then I could also encourage others to do that. It demonstrates that it is possible to reduce anxiety using the tools described, to increase knowledge of self and therefore increase confidence. So I've actually contributed to the body of knowledge around that when it comes to being explicit about raising concerns. As social workers, we're required to promote social justice. So using, critical race theory and my own narrative, I've been able to amplify marginalised voices. Throughout my research, I aim to find material literature research that was from practitioners, researchers, academics of colour, so that it wasn't just the majority white voice that we normally hear. So being able to amplify those voices has really widened the context about, intercultural relationships and the wider context of intersectionality and how that might impact our client practitioner relationships. So also, although my research is centered around race and ethnicity, I would say it's valid for any relationship that's characterized by difference, because we can start unpicking those differences, whatever they may be, and look about how they are impacting communication dyads in any area. So that was, another outcome. And moving forward, I would like to think that my research is going to encourage further research into anxiety about amongst non-white practitioners, because there was a massive void in research available to me when I was conducting this. Specifically looking at that, I could find lots of research on anxiety amongst social workers and lots of research around, some research around anxiety and race, but there was no research around the impact of anxiety for workers of colour. So that was really important for me. And it also highlights marginalised voices and enables us to think about the narrative of non-white thinkers. So I think that's been an absolute honour for me to be able to do that, and I hope it inspires others to be similarly courageous when undertaking such a journey. So that's it, guys. Whistle stop talk. Thank you for listening.
Firstly, Delin, thank you so much for sharing your research. I think I speak for everyone on the call to say thank you so much for being willing to, share your journey into social work and then sharing your anxieties that you had in your practice and your willingness to explore self. I think what stood out to me was that you started to explore that professional anxiety about having conversations about risk, which I think lots of practitioners have, but then your willingness to explore self, and like you talk about that, it really in depth. I think the systemic tools that you highlight, it's your willingness to really explore that fully that I think it really has been very powerful. I don't know if anyone has any questions that you would like to post in the chat that I could maybe put to Delin. We've only got just about a minute or so, but there might be time for one question or a reflection. There's a couple of reflections there in the chat, Delin, in terms of how interesting and helpful and useful that's been for practice. So that kind of echoes what I said, but I don't know if anyone has any questions that you would like to put to Leah. You can come off mute if you like, Leah. Or you can post it in the chat. Can't hear any questions, but sorry, if you type it in the chat, that's probably the easiest way. It's mostly just thanks that are coming through Delin, for your presentation. I suppose I had one question, which was just in terms of that kind of, you noted that use of self, and I just wondered if that felt vulnerable at times to that use of self and self-disclosure. Was that something that you kind of thought about?
Yes, and the answer to the question, Ross, is yes, I did feel vulnerable. However, my position prior to any self-disclosure was an uncomfortable position anyway, because if I'm engaging with a family and I know I've gone for my visit, I know what my task is, my objective is, I need to be raising particular issues, and if I'm finding that so uncomfortable to do, then by comparison feeling vulnerable was less uncomfortable, if that makes sense. And I suppose I was encouraged, because if it worked, it empowered me then to think about, okay, this is a stance that I can take that's comfortable for me and comfortable for the parent that I'm working with. Then, you know, it was a positive step. So yes, it was vulnerable, but in a comfortable way.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much again for doing that. So I'm sorry, we've just got to cut things short because it's 11:30, but thank you so much, and thank you everyone for attending this morning.